In the vast expanse of the Milky Way, there exists a special branch of Earth's interstellar government known as the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. These brave men and women venture into the cosmic unknown armed with nothing but briefcases, pleasant smiles, and an encyclopedic knowledge of appropriate fork usage at formal dinners. At least that's what everyone thinks. Jack Harrington was the poster child for the GDC. Tall, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair that cost more to maintain than most diplomatic missions, Jack had been solving interstellar crises for 20 years. His record was impeccable. His methods were textbook. His suits were tailored on 3 different planets. Ambassador Harrington, the Vorkarian delegation, has agreed to meet on Concordia Station. His AI assistant chimed from his wrist communicator. They're sending their top military advisor and a diplomatic proxy. Jack sighed, staring out the viewport of his ship, the aptly named Peaceful Resolution. The stars twinkled innocently, unaware of the tension building in this sector of space. So they're sending General Krotz himself? That's concerning. The Vorkarian Empire had been expanding aggressively for the past decade. A species is evolved from predatory reptilians. They respected strength above all else and considered diplomacy a game played by the weak while the strong prepared for war. Their recent annexation of the Plex Nebula had put them in direct conflict with several human colonies, and tension was at an all-time high. "Brief me again on why everyone thinks we're pushovers," Jack said, adjusting his cufflinks left one first, then right, as was his pre-mission ritual. The AI's voice remained pleasantly neutral. "Since humanity's entrance into the galactic community 2 centuries ago, we have maintained a policy of visible non-aggression in diplomatic settings. All GDC representatives are publicly certified as unarmed. This has led to the widespread belief that humans prefer negotiation to conflict, which most warrior cultures interpret as weakness." Jack chuckled. "The oldest trick in the book: appear weak when you are strong." "Indeed, Ambassador. Your diplomatic team is assembled in the briefing room. When humans first ventured into space, they quickly realized they were neither the strongest nor the most technologically advanced species. What they did have was adaptability, creativity, and a talent for appearing harmless until the exact moment they weren't. The diplomatic corps had perfected this approach, walking into dangerous situations with empty holsters and walking out with signed treaties. "Any word on what the Vorkarians want?" Jack asked, heading toward the briefing room. "Officially, they wish to discuss border security. Unofficially, intel suggests they're assessing our defenses for a potential first strike." Jack nodded grimly. "Then we'd better make sure they leave with a very different impression than the one they came with." The briefing room of the Peaceful Resolution was a marvel of human engineering, sleek, functional, and with hidden compartments in nearly every surface. Jack's team was already assembled, their expressions a mix of professional calm and underlying tension. "All right, folks, let's get acquainted with our dance partners," Jack announced, pulling up the holographic display. Mei Wong, the ship's technical expert, was busily typing away at her datapad, with cybernetic enhancements discreetly hidden beneath her formal attire, and a mind that could process data faster than most ship computers. She was the team's secret weapon when it came to tech. Her small stature and perpetually cheerful demeanor made her easy to underestimate, a mistake many adversaries had made only once. "The Vorkarians are bringing some serious hardware to this peaceful negotiation," May reported, not looking up from her work. "Their ship's got enough firepower to glass a small moon, and their encryption protocols have been upgraded since our last encounter." "Can you crack them?" Jack asked. May finally looked up, her augmented eyes flashing with momentary blue light. "I already have. Their security is impressive but predictable. Military minds, you know." Diego Reyes, the cultural specialist, was studying Vorkarian body language videos on his tablet. Built like a linebacker, but with the gentle touch of a poet, Diego had spent years studying alien cultures, specializing in translating the untranslatable. His photographic memory and talent for mimicry had saved diplomatic missions more times than anyone could count. "General Krotz is a piece of work," Diego commented, scratching his neatly trimmed beard. 3 successful military campaigns, revered among his people as a strategic genius. But he's got a blind spot, classic superiority complex. He genuinely believes that species who prefer diplomacy are evolutionarily inferior. Jack nodded thoughtfully. And Ambassador Drell? Not actually an ambassador, Diego replied, being more of a political officer. She's there to make sure Krotz doesn't exceed his authority, but she's a true believer in Vorkarian supremacy, a graduated top of her clutch from their military academy. Jack paced the room, mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. So we're dealing with two military minds who think diplomats are weak and humans are soft. Perfect. The ship's AI interrupted. Ambassador, we're approaching Concordia Station. The Vorkarian vessel is already docked. Concordia Station hung in space like a giant metal snowflake, its gleaming arms extending outward from a central hub. Built by a coalition of species as a neutral meeting ground, it was named for the Roman goddess of harmony, an aspiration that often fell short in practice. As their ship docked, Jack adjusted his tie and addressed his team. Remember, we're just simple diplomats here to talk. May standard protocols until otherwise notified. Diego, keep an eye on their tells. If things go south, we move to contingency plan Whiskey Tango. You think it'll come to that, boss? Diego asked, his expression serious. Jack's smile was tight. I hope not, but hope isn't a strategy. The airlock cycled open, revealing the sterile white corridors of Concordia Station. Waiting for them was a delegation of station officials. Looking nervous, the station's administrator, a tall Arcturian with 6 limbs and blue-tinted skin, stepped forward. Ambassador Harrington, welcome to Concordia. The Vorkarian delegation is eager to begin. The administrator's translation implant didn't quite capture the anxiety in his voice. I'm sure they are, Jack replied smoothly. Lead the way. As they walked through the station, Jack noted the positions of security cameras, emergency exits, and environmental controls. Old habits died hard, even on diplomatic missions, especially on diplomatic missions. The Vorkarians were waiting in the main conference room, their tall, reptilian forms dominating the space. General Krotz stood with his back to the door, staring out at the stars, while Ambassador Drell sat rigidly at the table, her scaled fingers tapping impatiently. The human delegation has arrived, announced the administrator before quickly retreating. General Krotz turned slowly, his yellow eyes scanning the humans with unconcealed disdain. Standing over 7 feet tall, with emerald scales and ceremonial scars across his face, he cut an imposing figure. His formal military uniform was adorned with campaign medals and, quite obviously, a ceremonial blade at his hip. Ambassador Harrington, Krotz said, his voice a low rumble. I expected someone more impressive. Jack smiled pleasantly. General Krotz, Ambassador Drell, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope we can come to an understanding that benefits all parties. Drell's forked tongue flicked out briefly, a sign of amusement or contempt. Diego had briefed. Let us not waste time with pleasantries, human. We are here to discuss terms. Jack maintained his diplomatic smile. Of course. Shall we begin? The conference room on Concordia Station was designed to put all parties at ease, with comfortable seating, soft lighting, and environmental controls that could be adjusted to suit any species' preferences. It was currently set to a balmy 32 degrees Celsius, a compromise between human comfort and Vorkarian preference for heat. General Krotz remained standing while Ambassador Drell sat across from the humans. Jack noticed that both Vorkarians had positioned themselves near the door, a tactical choice that wasn't lost on him. Let me be direct, Ambassador Harrington, Krotz began, his clawed hands clasped behind his back. The Plex Nebula has been legally claimed by the Vorkarian Empire through right of discovery and development. Jack maintained his pleasant expression. With all due respect, General, human colonies have been established in the outer reaches of the nebula for over 15 years. Our mining operations were registered with the Galactic Council well before your exploratory vessels arrived. Drell leaned forward, her scales catching the light. Your presence is minimal. 3 small colonies, barely self-sufficient. Our development plans will bring prosperity to the entire region. Diego cleared his throat softly, a signal to Jack that he'd caught something in the Vorkarian's body language. Perhaps we could discuss a joint development initiative, Jack suggested, opening his briefcase and removing several data tablets. I've brought proposals that would benefit both our peoples. Krotz made a dismissive gesture. The Vorkarian Empire does not share resources. We have claimed this territory and are prepared to defend it. I see, Jack replied, his tone still pleasant. And may I ask what defense measures you've already implemented in the nebula? A slight twitch in Drell's eye ridge told Jack he'd touched a nerve. The Vorkarians hadn't actually secured the territory yet. This was a probing mission. That is classified military information, Drell snapped. This meeting is about establishing recognition of our sovereignty, not discussing tactical matters. May, who had been quietly setting up her equipment, spoke up. Is it? Darren, if perhaps a data exchange would help us understand each other's positions better? I've prepared some information on human resource requirements and colony expansion projections. As she spoke, Mai's fingers danced across her console, her cybernetic implants allowing her to process information at superhuman speeds. To the Vorkarians, it looked like she was simply preparing a presentation. In reality, she was scanning their communications and gathering intelligence. We have no interest in your technological trinkets, Krotz said dismissively. Humans rely too heavily on your machines. It makes you soft. Jack noticed the slight hesitation before Krotz said soft, a tell Diego had briefed him on. The general was repeating propaganda he'd been fed, not expressing his genuine assessment. Perhaps a demonstration of our colony management systems would illustrate our commitment to the region, Jack suggested. He nodded to May, who projected a holographic display of the human colonies. As the Vorkarians leaned in to examine the display, Diego subtly adjusted his position, cataloguing their reactions and movements. Jack caught his eye. Diego gave an almost imperceptible nod, confirming these were indeed military leaders, not diplomats. Their posture, their attention to defensive positions, everything screamed threat assessment. Your colonies are poorly defended, Krotz remarked, studying the hologram. A single battle cruiser could eliminate them within hours. We're a peaceful presence in the nebula, Jack replied. Our colonies focus on research and resource development, not military installations. Drell's mouth curled in what passed for a Vorkarian smile. This is why humans will never be a dominant force in the galaxy. You bring data tablets to negotiations while we bring warships. Jack spread his hands in a gesture of openness. We believe in the power of mutually beneficial agreements. War is costly for all parties involved. Only for the losers, Krotz retorted. The negotiations continued for several hours, with the Vorkarians growing increasingly dismissive of the human proposals. Jack maintained his diplomatic composure, but Diego could see the tension building in his jaw. During a brief recess, the human team huddled in a corner of the room. They're not here to negotiate, Diego whispered. They're sizing us up for an invasion. May nodded, her eyes flashing blue momentarily as her implants processed data. I've intercepted some of their ship communications. ITs. Oh, they're discussing military positioning, not diplomatic outcomes. Jack sighed, straightening his tie. Then we proceed to the next phase. May, initiate protocol umbrella. Diego, prepare for cultural reassessment. You think it'll come to that? Diego asked quietly. Jack's smile was grim. I think our friends are about to learn why the Galactic Council calls us the most dangerous diplomats in the sector. When negotiations resumed, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The Vorkarians were no longer bothering to maintain diplomatic pretenses. General Krotz had removed his formal outer robe, revealing more of his battle armor beneath. Ambassador Drell's posture had become even more rigid, her scaled fingers occasionally brushing against a device at her belt. We have considered your proposals, Drell announced, and find them inadequate. The Vorkarian Empire has decided to establish a security presence throughout the Plex Nebula, effective immediately. Jack raised an eyebrow. A security presence? Would you care to elaborate? Krotz stepped forward, looming over the table. Our fleet will enter the nebula within the next standard day. Your colonies will accept Vorkarian protection or face consequences. That sounds remarkably like an ultimatum, General, Jack replied, his voice still calm but with an edge to it now. I was under the impression we were here to negotiate. Negotiation is merely a prelude to victory, Drell said, quoting what Jack recognized as a Vorkarian military maxim. Your colonies are isolated and vulnerable. Accept our terms now, and your people may continue their operations under Vorkarian supervision. Jack glanced at Diego, who gave a subtle head shake. The Vorkarians weren't bluffing. What you're proposing is a violation of at least 3 Galactic Council treaties, Jack said, closing his data tablet. Perhaps we should adjourn and consult with our respective governments before proceeding further. Krotz made a sound that might have been a laugh. Your government is 10 light years away. Ambassador, by the time you consult with them, the matter will be settled. Jack's diplomatic smile finally faltered. Are you threatening military action against civilian colonies? We are informing you of decisions already made, Drell replied coldly. The Vorkarian fleet moves into position as we speak. The tension in the room was palpable. May's fingers moved rapidly across her console, while Diego shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. I must strongly advise against this course of action, Jack said, his voice taking on a warning tone that the Vorkarians completely missed. There are diplomatic channels to resolve territorial disputes. Diplomatic channels, Krotz repeated mockingly. The refuge of the weak. While you humans file complaints with the Galactic Council, we will have established control over the entire nebula. Jack stood slowly, straightening his jacket. General Krotz, Ambassador Drell, I implore you to reconsider. Military action against human colonies would have serious consequences. Drell's tongue flicked out in amusement. Consequences? Your nearest military outpost is in the Rigel system. You have no fleet presence in this sector. There are always consequences to breaking the peace, Jack insisted, his voice hardening, some less obvious than others. Krotz stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. Your diplomatic posturing is useless, human. We have already disabled your ship's communications array. No distress calls will be leaving this station. Jack's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. You've sabotaged our ship. A precautionary measure, Drell said smoothly. We couldn't risk you warning your colonies. Something changed in Jack's demeanor. A subtle shift that the Vorkarians missed entirely, but that made Diego and May exchange glances. I see, Jack said quietly. And what happens now? Now, Krotz growled, you will be detained here until our operation is complete. As a professional courtesy, we will then release you to inform your government of the new status quo. Jack straightened his tie one last time. I'm afraid I can't agree to those terms, General. Your agreement is not required, Drell snapped. She pressed a button on her communicator. Security team, enter and secure the human delegates. The door slid open, revealing 4 heavily armed Vorkarian soldiers. Jack looked at them, then back at Krotz and Drell. This is your final decision? Jack asked, his voice carrying a weight that should have warned them. It is, Krotz confirmed smugly. Jack nodded slowly, then glanced at his team. It appears diplomacy has failed. Those 5 words changed everything. The change was immediate and dramatic. Nye's diplomatic console suddenly projected a blinding flash that disoriented the Vorkarian soldiers. Diego, the cultural specialist, moved with a speed and precision that no cultural specialist had any business possessing, but disarming the nearest guard before they could even register what was happening. Jack Harrington, the very picture of a mild-mannered diplomat, reached into his seemingly ordinary briefcase and pulled out what appeared to be a pen. With a flick of his wrist, it extended into a tactical baton that crackled with energy. What is the meaning of this? Krotz bellowed, reaching for his ceremonial blade. This, Jack replied calmly, is what happens when you mistake politeness for weakness. Drell lunged for her communicator, but May was faster. The technical expert's hands flew across her console, and suddenly the station's communication systems went dark. Alarms that should have been blaring remained silent. SDK. I've isolated this section of the station, May announced, her augmented eyes glowing blue. And I've taken the liberty of sending a detailed report of this incident to the Galactic Council, with timestamps and audio recordings. Diego, who had efficiently dispatched 2 of the guards, called out, "Should I explain to our friends why human diplomats are trained in 15 different combat forms?" "I think they're figuring it out," Jack replied, smoothly sidestepping Krotz's blade and landing a precisely calculated strike that sent the general stumbling backward. The remaining Vorkarian guards raised their weapons, but found them suddenly non-functional. May smiled sweetly. "Sorry about that. Standard electronic countermeasures. Your weapons have been temporarily disabled." "Impossible," Drell hissed. "Your tools are diplomatic equipment, not military technology." Jack offered a smile that was all teeth. "Ambassador Drell, allow me to introduce you to the concept of dual-use technology. Everything we brought to this meeting serves at least 2 purposes. To demonstrate," Jack tapped his seemingly ordinary tie clip. A translucent energy shield sprang into existence around him, deflecting a desperate lunge from one of the guards. "Humans," Jack continued, as if delivering a lecture while casually disarming another guard, "evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. We became very good at turning everyday objects into survival tools." Diego nodded sagely while applying a nerve hold to a struggling Vorkarian. "It's a fascinating cultural adaptation. I'd be happy to provide a more detailed anthropological explanation once you're secured." May's console had transformed into a control hub, screens displaying the station's security systems, life support, and communications. "I've sealed off all routes to your ship," she informed the stunned Vorkarians. "And I've taken the precaution of locking down your weapon systems. Standard protocol for diplomatic incidents." Krotz, his pride wounded more than his body, roared in frustration. "You claim to be diplomats. This is deception." "No," Jack corrected, stepping aside as Diego efficiently secured the last guard. "This is diplomacy with a contingency plan. There's a difference." Within minutes, the Vorkarian delegation was secured, their weapons confiscated, and their communications blocked. Jack straightened his slightly disheveled suit and addressed the bewildered Krotz and Drell. "Now, shall we return to our negotiation? I believe we were discussing your fleet's planned incursion into human territory." Drell's scales had paled significantly. How did you disable our guards so quickly?" "The Galactic Diplomatic Corps," Jack explained patiently. "Every human diplomat undergoes extensive training in what we call physical negotiation. It's a requirement for field work." "Your soldiers masquerading as diplomats," Krotz accused. Jack shook his head. "No, General. We're diplomats who are prepared for when diplomacy fails. There's a subtle but important distinction. May had restored station communications, but only on human-controlled channels. Ambassador, I've contacted the peaceful resolution. Captain Lucas reports that the Vorkarian sabotage was detected and neutralized before it could affect our systems." "Excellent," Jack replied. "And the Vorkarian fleet?" "Currently being tracked by 3 human stealth frigates that were shadowing our diplomatic mission," May reported cheerfully. "Standard protocol for high-risk negotiations." The color drained completely from Drell's face. "You had military vessels escorting you? That's a violation of diplomatic protocols." "Not at all," Diego interjected. "The Galactic Council Resolution 1142 specifically allows for discrete security measures for diplomatic missions in contested regions. We filed the appropriate paperwork." Jack straightened his cuffs. "Now, about those negotiations. I believe our position has been clarified, but I'm still open to finding a mutually beneficial solution." 3 hours later, a very different meeting was taking place in the same conference room. General Krotz and Ambassador Drell sat subdued at the table, their posture significantly less aggressive. The Vorkarian guards had been confined to their ship, which remained locked down under May's expert control. "These revised terms are acceptable," Jack announced, reviewing the agreement on his tablet. "Joint development of the Plex Nebula resources, with a demilitarized buffer zone monitored by Galactic Council peacekeepers." Krotz, looking thoroughly chastened, merely nodded. Drell, ever the politician, attempted to save face. The Vorkarian Empire has always valued peaceful cooperation. Of course, Jack agreed magnanimously. I'm glad we could reach an understanding. As the Vorkarians signed the agreement, using Jack's pen, which was now just a pen again, Diego leaned close to his boss. I think they'll honor it. They will, Jack murmured. Especially after May sends them the footage of today's events. Nothing encourages diplomatic compliance like the threat of embarrassment. The formalities concluded, Jack escorted the Vorkarian delegation back to their ship. As the airlock cycled closed behind them, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. Well, May said, joining him in the corridor. That was interesting. Standard diplomatic outcome, Jack replied with a wry smile. We came, we talked, we avoided an interstellar incident. Diego chuckled. You know, I almost feel bad for them. They genuinely believed humans were defenseless without warships. A common misconception, Jack said, leading his team back toward their own ship. Most species arm their diplomats with weapons. We arm our diplomats with skills. Back aboard the Peaceful Resolution, Captain Lucas greeted them with a knowing smile. Successful negotiations. Ambassador? Very, Jack confirmed. The Vorkarians have discovered a newfound respect for diplomatic solutions. And how many of them required medical attention? The captain asked dryly. Only 2, Diego reported. And those were just bruised egos and minor contusions. Jack retreated to his quarters to file his report. As he dictated the official version of events, carefully worded to emphasize the peaceful resolution while downplaying the physical negotiation phase, he couldn't help but smile at the irony. Addendum to report, he added. Recommend diplomatic refresher course for Vorkarian representatives with emphasis on human negotiation techniques. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council convened to ratify the Plex Nebula Treaty. Jack stood before the assembled representatives, delivering his account of the negotiations. He carefully omitted certain details, focusing instead on the mutually beneficial outcome. As he concluded his report, the Arcturian representative raised a limb. Ambassador Harrington, this is the 3rd time in as many years that you've turned a potentially violent confrontation into a peaceful resolution. The Council commends your diplomatic skills. Thank you, Representative, Jack replied modestly. I simply believe in exhausting all diplomatic options. After the session, Jack found himself in the Council lounge, where he was approached by a young Centaurian diplomat. Ambassador Harrington, the newcomer said eagerly, I've been studying your negotiation methods. They're extraordinary. How do you maintain such success with minimal security? Jack smiled, sipping his drink. The key to successful diplomacy isn't bringing the biggest guns to the table. It's making sure you never need to use them, while being fully prepared if you do. As he spoke, he noticed General Krotz entering the lounge with a Vorkarian delegation. The general spotted Jack and froze momentarily before offering a stiff but respectful nod. Excuse me, Jack said to the young diplomat. I should say hello to an old colleague. As Jack crossed the room, he couldn't help but notice how Krotz's posture had changed, less aggressive, more cautious. The general's eyes tracked Jack's hands, his briefcase, even his tie clip. General Krotz, Jack greeted warmly. How good to see you again. I trust the treaty implementation is proceeding smoothly. Very smoothly, Ambassador, Krotz replied, his voice carefully neutral. The Vorkarian Empire has developed a new appreciation for diplomatic solutions. Jack smiled. I'm delighted to hear it. After all, as we humans say, the pen is mightier than the sword. He pulled out his pen to sign a drink order and couldn't help but notice how every Vorkarian in the vicinity flinched. Some lessons, it seemed, were learned the hard way.